Hey everybody, I'm Ryan Airy. Let's talk about The Mandalorian. Alright, we got big spoilers for Mandalorian just ahead. Now you could say that Mandalorian is Star Wars going back to its roots. And I don't just mean the Easter eggs, callbacks, and references, and there are a lot of those. Since 1977, Star Wars was sold to the public as a Western in space.
Well, that's really what it was. It was a shootout, wasn't it? A Western in outer space. Good guys versus the bad guys.
Jon Favreau's new Disney Plus show doubles down on that idea. But while the original Star Wars reinvented the fun Western adventures from the genre's earlier years, this show is more like a gritty spaghetti Western. You could even call it The Mandalorian with no name. Now the score, which is incredible, even mimics the work of Enrico Morricone, who scored some of the most famous Sergio Leone westerns. The music was composed by Ludwig Göransson, who also scored Black Panther, and I'm telling you, he really outdid himself here. The score is amazing. One of the characters Mando fights off for his bounty is a Quarren. This is the aquatic species that cohabits the planet Mon Calamari with the Mon Cala. That's the same species as Admiral Akbar. Now I get the impression from this guy
Mando
that Mando is a derogatory name for a Mandalorian. I hope not, because I say it a lot in this video and then I'll come off as space racist. The valet who fetches Mando a speeder is a Kubaz. You may remember his species from A New Hope when the spy Garindon ratted out Luke and his friends to the stormtroopers. His bounty is played by Horatio Sands, a veteran of SNL. Also, apparently, you can hail a cruiser in Star Wars, just like Space Uber.
That's why I offered to hail a cruiser.
He mentions wanting to get home for Life Day, and everybody, this is the best Easter egg. Life Day is the Star Wars universe's answer to the holiday season, first seen in the notorious Star Wars holiday TV special.
Happy Life Day.
Now in that special, Han is trying to get Chewbacca home to Kashyyyk for Life Day. And also, it ends with Princess Leia singing a song about the holiday.
A day of harmony.
When the ship has trouble taking off, it makes the same failing biplane sound as the Millennium Falcon. The speeders might also look familiar from A New Hope. Luke owned a similar speeder, the X-37, but sold it to pay off Han.
Ever since the XP-38 came out, they just aren't in demand.
Now maybe this speeder is the newer model that devalued the X-37. Mando flies a Razor Crest, a Mandalorian gunship. Notice the design of it is very similar to the Republic gunships and transports that we first saw in Attack of the Clones. He carbon freezes the bounty just like Han Solo in Empire Strikes Back. Now I always got the impression from Empire that this process was normally used to freeze gases, not humans.
We only use this facility for carbon freezing. You put him in there, it might kill him.
I do not want the Emperor's prize damaged. We will test it.
But maybe Boba Fett popularized this trend, and now it's become standard for all guild members.
It's not slow at all, actually very busy. They just don't want to pay guild rates.
And speaking of the Guild of Bounty Hunters, it turns out that Mando is a union man.
When you need a bounty caught clean, don't go to some mercenary scum from Ord Mantell. You want a union bounty hunter. Go quality. Go guild.
On the street here, we see a couple astromech droids, and this one looks like the R4-D4 unit with a bad motivator from New Hope. Now this bar is filled with Easter eggs. There's aliens playing Sabacc, the card game where Lando lost the Millennium Falcon to Han, a Rodian, which is the same species as Greedo, and a couple Transdoshans just like the bounty hunter Bosk. And this person here, that's your mom. Carl Weathers plays Greef Karga, who works for the Guild of Bounty Hunters and distributes the different bounties. I smiled when he haggled with Mando because Weathers is notoriously cheap in real life. So much so that it became a gag for his character on Arrested Development.
Whoa. There's still plenty of meat on that bone.
This takes place 7 years after the Empire fell in Return of the Jedi, which is why Imperial credits won't spend.
I don't know if you heard, but the Empire is gone.
Instead, he's paid in calamari flan, the currency of the aforementioned Mon Cala. This is a nice little detail that shows the galaxy is still in flux. New Republic credits aren't the norm yet, and some people still spend Imperial credits in the Outer Rim. Now the reason he takes calamari flan is probably because the Mon Calamari have long been allies of the Rebellion and their economy will contribute greatly to the New Republic.
Nerd alert!
He goes through a market filled with Jawas, which I find interesting. As far as I know, so far these scavengers have only ever appeared on Tatooine. Now I'm wondering if they're actually interstellar scrappers and bargain shoppers, checking out the galaxy's flea markets for a hot sale. And check out this hobo begging for change so he can be high on his VR system. Dude, you're actually in Star Wars. Stop playing video games. There's also a Kowakian monkey lizard cooking on the fire while his mother looks on. This is the same species as Salacious Crumb, Jabba's court jester from Return of the Jedi. Would you eat one of these things? And before you answer, keep this in mind. They taste amazing. Let me know your answer down in the comments. To enter this building, he has to go through a TT-8L gatekeeper droid like the one that guarded Jabba's palace and was ultimately terrible at his job. And there's a power droid like we saw being tortured in Return of the Jedi. He goes to meet the client played by Werner Herzog. Now Herzog is one of the few remaining remnants of the Empire. I get the feeling from his outfit and his fancy medallion that he's not a military man, he's an imperial governor, or maybe even a Moff. There are several infighting factions remaining, like this one led by Giancarlo Esposito. They've all been pushed to the outer rim of the galaxy and are fighting each other for what little power remains. Herzog gives him a card of Beskar steel, the metal the Mandalorians use to make their armor. Now this is very important in Mandalorian culture. So a little bit of background on the Mandalorians. Hundreds of years ago, they were a proud warrior race, and Mandalorian armor is a treasured family heirloom.
The armor I wear is 500 years old. I reforged it to my liking, but the battles, the history, the blood, all lives within it.
But their planet was destroyed by civil war and became a mostly unlivable desert. Then the Mandalorians lived in special dome cities and mostly swore off war forever until a more violent faction tried to overthrow the peaceful government during the Clone Wars. Then the planet was briefly controlled by Darth Maul and it fell into the hands of the Separatists. And one of the last battles of the Clone Wars was the Siege of Mandalore, when the Republic finally took control of the planet. The last time we saw Mandalore was in the Star Wars Rebels TV series. In that show, the Mandalorians were fighting to overthrow the Empire and unite all the various clans and houses of Mandalore. And I expect that show to tie into this series, because this pilot was directed by Dave Filoni, who created Star Wars Rebels. But in this episode, it's revealed that some Mandalorians don't take off their helmets.
Is it true that you guys never take off your helmets?
Now, I'm not sure if that goes for all Mandalorians or just this one tribe. It could be that the Mandalorians suffered so much at the hands of the Empire that they've universally embraced their warlike ways, and wearing armor has become mandatory. It's also important to note here that Boba and Jango Fett are not Mandalorians. This show isn't about them, it's about exploring Mandalorian culture.
Pack your things. We're leaving.
In the Mandalorian refugee bunker, you see this skull, which is featured on the Mandalorian flag. This is the likeness of a skull of an animal called a mythosaur. It's basically a Mandalorian dinosaur. The armorer mentions that the metal was stolen in the Great Purge. So where does this purge fit into the timeline? Well, we see young Mando and his family in the flashback. And in the trailer, we see that they're running from Separatist battle droids. So I'm guessing this happened during the conquest of Mandalore about 30 years earlier. The Great Purge would have happened after that, during Imperial control. This is probably after we last saw Mandalorian Rebels, when the Empire cracked down and bled the planet dry of its most valuable resource, the Beskar steel. She makes him a pauldron shoulder guard, but not before asking,
"Has your signet been revealed?"
Not yet.
I think she's talking about the symbol of his clan or his house. If his signet was revealed, she would have made it part of his pauldron. She also says,
"This is extremely generous. The excess will sponsor many foundlings."
And this is a small hint about Mandalorian culture. My guess is that as refugees, they have to earn their armor piece by piece. So maybe this money helps a Mandalorian begin to build their own armor. Or she means sponsor as in a Sally Struthers, feed the children kind of way. Also, notice he doesn't have rocket launchers on his wrists like Boba Fett. Instead, he has Mandalorian vambraces. These are a more traditional Mandalorian weapon that were built to fight Jedi thousands of years ago. They contain darts and grappling hooks like we've seen both Boba and Jango Fett use. Now, judging from the trailer, Mando eventually acquires more pieces of his armor. So this seems like it's his arc of the season, to become a fully armored Mandalorian warrior who reveals his house signet. Following a standard Star Wars wipe, he arrives on a desert planet covered in moisture evaporators like we see in New Hope and Force Awakens. Nick Nolte's character is named Kuil, which I guess is pronounced Q. He's an Ugnaught farmer who just wants to live in peace. Ugnaughts, who we saw working a Cloud City scrap pile, have a reputation for being hardworking, so they were mostly enslaved by the Empire. Mando uses a scope with a readout very similar to Luke's binoculars, and they even make similar sounds. And also, he's surprised when something suddenly appears in his scope, just like Luke. I'm a big fan of classic westerns and Star Wars, so I'm a sucker for when the show combines the two elements, like when Mando has to break in a new Bronco. Wait, what are they calling it?
The one with the name that sounds like somebody gave up halfway through naming it.
A blurg. Blurgs were first seen in the TV movie Ewoks: The Battle for Endor, and have reappeared in the cartoons and video games since then. Then we meet IG-11, an assassin droid voiced by writer, director, visionary, plus actor Taika Waititi. Waititi also directed at least one episode of The Mandalorian. It's a shame that IG-11 died so quick, because I would have loved to have seen some Korg-level hijinks from it.
Stand down!
Hey, take it easy, man.
He's wearing a pair of Wookiee bandoliers. Now I'm guessing this is just to store ammo, not as a trophy, because he doesn't seem like the sentimental type.
The asset was to be terminated.
His self-destruct is a thermal detonator like we first saw in Return of the Jedi. Then we get to that adorable ending, which deserves a video all by itself. We see a cute little baby Yoda. Seriously, I cannot emphasize how effing cute this thing is. It's like a Porg plus a Mogwai plus Yoda, who's always been adorable. The baby is 50 years old, but remember, Yoda's people live a long time.
When 900 years old you reach, look as good you will not.
So far, the only other member of his species that we've seen is Yaddle, a female who sat on the Jedi Council in Phantom Menace. But the big question is, why does Herzog want Baby Yoda? Is every member of Yoda's species Force sensitive? Maybe he wants to use the baby to assume control of the remaining Imperials and overthrow the fledgling New Republic. Or maybe this doctor just wants to get a read on its midichlorian count. But also, IG-11 says it's his mission to kill the baby while Herzog wants it alive. So I think these two were working for separate parties. Maybe the droid was hired by Giancarlo Esposito's Imperial commander. Now one thing we do know, it's probably not a clone of Yoda, because this story takes place 30 years after the Clone Wars and 40 years after Palpatine became Chancellor. So I highly doubt that the Emperor commissioned a Yoda clone that far back. We also know from the cartoons and comics that the Empire was kidnapping Force-sensitive kids for years. So maybe Baby Yoda was one of those children, and he's incredibly strong with the Force. Or maybe, just maybe, this could be the love child of Yoda and Yaddle, and this scandal forced her off the Jedi Council before Attack of the Clones. So maybe the Jedi are all hypocrites and the Council was filled with sex scandals.
Tired Yoda is. Resign you will.
What do you think is the story behind Baby Yoda? And what do you think of The Mandalorian? I'm dying to know. Please tell me in the comments. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy.